Hi and welcome to our channel Tales of Heaven and Earth. Today we are taking a closer look at one of the most terrifying monsters, the Wąpierz, the Slavic version of vampire. I'll tell you about how our ancestors saw these blood-sucking beings, how they protected themselves from them, and what traces of this belief still remain today. Let's dive in. Slavic nightmares. Where did vampires come from? Our ancestors had no shortage of fears: harsh living conditions, long winters, disease and invasions. Life was full of dangers. But apart from visible threats, they also believed in invisible, immortal beings that could come back from the grave to torment the living. One of these beings was the Wąpierz, a terrifying undead blood drinker who became a topic of chilling fireside stories after dark. These were not tales just for children. The eerie stories of vampires stirred fear among all villagers. Who was the Wąpierz? The image of a vampire we know from today's movies and books has little to do with the original Slavic Wąpierz. These were not charming creatures in elegant clothes, rather they were horrifying corpses, rotting and foul-smelling, with great strength and often monstrous appearances. The Wąpierz could look somewhat human but often had grotesque features, like red eyes, claw-like nails instead of fingernails, or sharp teeth. In different Slavic regions, its appearance varied. In Ukraine, it was more animal-like, while in southern Europe it could live in homes, seeming like an ordinary person. Vampire powers and tricks. The Wąpierz, in Slavic beliefs, didn't limit itself to drinking blood. It also had other supernatural powers. It could shapeshift into a bat, a wolf, or even appears as an ordinary person. A master of hypnosis, it could draw a victim in, taking control of their will and leading them deep into the dark forest, where a grim fate awaited. His abilities made the Wąpierz incredibly dangerous, and villagers feared walking alone after dark. How did people fight vampires? Fighting a vampire wasn't simple because people first had to confirm it was actually a vampire. When someone suspected that a Wąpierz was causing trouble, villagers would dig up graves, believing that a body that hadn't decayed was a sign of blood drinker. If a person was suspected to be a Wąpierz, the body was dismembered and the head was pierced with a wooden stake or nails. Another method was cremation. Burning the body was to permanently end the undead activities. How to protect against vampires? Of course, prevention was better than facing the creatures directly. So our ancestors used various ways to protect themselves from vampires. The most popular method was using garlic, as the vampire couldn't stand the smell. This plant was believed to have magical repellent properties. Another method was securing the bodies of the deceased. Some corpses had coins placed in their mouths, which were meant to pay for passage to the afterlife. In extreme cases, people would cut off the head and place it at the feet of the body. This way, they believed the dead would not come back to life and harm people. A legend about vampire. In a distant village, far from other settlements, where news from the outside world rarely reached, the people lived in harmony with nature and each other. No tragedies happened there beyond the natural ones that had always haunted the poor. Life revolved around daily tasks, rituals and occasional celebrations. Children were born and the old passed away, just as it should be. One autumn, however, things changed. A young girl who had been healthy died unsuddenly, and soon after, a young boy also passed away. At first, it was seen as a tragic stroke and bad luck. But a month later, two more healthy, young people died. The villagers began to worry about their children's safety. They searched for a reason, finally deciding that some evil force was involved, and called for a priest. Before the priest and an old nun arrived, another child had died, and one more lay weak and sick. The priest prayed, sprinkled holy water on the villagers, and left the nun to watch over the ill. But when several more young people started to weaken and pale, the old nun told the villagers' elders of a similar story she had once heard. In another village, a similar illness had struck, caused by a creature, an undead fiend who drank the blood of people and led them to their deaths. Unfortunately, she had no advice on what to do. Just then, a band of Roma people passed nearby, and they were asked to help. The Roma, who knew the shadowy world where monsters roamed, agreed and got to work without hesitations. With the help of the villagers, they dug up graves in the local cemetery and found the culprit, a woman from the village, buried outside of consecrated ground because of her selfish deeds toward others. Though it had been 3 years since her burial, her body lay unchanged, plump and red-cheeked, with fresh blood dripping from her fanged mouth. One of the older Roma men leaped into the grave and drove a quickly carved stake through the creature's heart. Blood spurted high into the air, hot and fresh, a disturbing sight for a corpse. Worse, the dead woman opened her eyes and let out a terrible scream. In that moment, another Roma swung a shovel and decapitated the monster. Once the creature stopped twitching and the blood ceased to flow, they built a pyre and burned the remains. The villagers also dug up the graves of those killed by the vampire and performed the same ritual to prevent any of them from returning. Afterward, the Roma moved on, and the villagers returned to their peaceful lives. The nun, however, remained troubled, torn between her fate and the mysterious events she had witnessed, unable to fully explain to the priest what had happened. Vampires in pop culture. Belief in vampires has survived, though their appearances has changed. Today, vampires in pop culture are mysterious, even attractive figures. Think about movies like Twilight or Dracula. Literature, films and video games are full of blood drinkers who are both frightening and fascinating. However, in some places in Eastern Europe, people still bury suspected vampires face down, so that if they awake, they cannot find their way back to the surface. Fun facts. Archaeologists sometimes find graves with unusual precautions. For example, skulls with a stone in their jaws meant to stop the vampires from drinking blood. In some areas, people placed sickles around the neck of suspected vampire so that if it tried to rise, the blade could cut off its head. So, we've reached the end of our journey through the world of Slavic vampires. Dark, terrifying and quite different from the ones we know today. If you want to hear more tales like this, let us know in the comments.